Sit back, relax, stay sinful. So in my life, there have only been a few times I have ever looked back and thought I could have been killed. This is one of them. It was back in 2010 and I just started college. I had arrived pretty early as I figured traffic would be much worse than it turned out to be. I decided to kill some time at the local Walmart across the street. After shopping and buying some food, I made my way out, and once I stepped off the curb, a man stopped me. This guy was probably between his late 30s and early 40s, and pretty unkempt looking. Ripped jeans that looked old, a shirt that was faded, and looked like it once had a design or writing on it. He also wore a baseball cap that appeared to be the only somewhat new thing he had on. Once he stopped me, he started up with, "Hey man, I hate to bother you, but I was doing some construction work up the road. My truck ran out of gas. Can you help me out and drive me to the gas station? I'm alone and pretty desperate." Obviously this seemed very sketchy, so I instead offered to give him $10. I figured maybe this guy really is down on his luck and needed help. To my surprise, he immediately shot down my offer, and instead continued to insist I instead let him drive me to the gas station in his truck, pay for his gas, and then he'd drive me back. Needless to say, this all seemed incredibly bizarre, and I told him no and that I was in a hurry. Instead of leaving it alone, he began to tell me, "Man, come on. I'm all alone here and my truck is on E. I'm stranded here by myself." When I continued to walk away, he began to try to grab at my arm while continuing to beg. I realized quickly that the way we were positioned, every time he went to grab at me and I walked away, he was leading me more and more away from the store and more toward the parking lot, which was not very full this early in the morning. Not wanting to let him keep leading me away, I walked back towards the store and said I had something I'd forgotten inside. Instead of following me, he quickly backed off once I made it to the doors. I think he didn't want to go inside and risk others seeing. This may sound like overreacting, but at this point I was freaking out. I had never had someone actually try and grab me like that, and every bad scenario was running through my head. Not wanting him to do this with anyone else, I alerted the front desk of what was going on, and they said they could handle it. Honestly, I don't know if they did or didn't, because I quickly went for the other exit and nearly ran to my car. Once I was in my car, I noticed he was walking away from his spot, and I assumed either they had kicked him out or he was simply admitting defeat for the day. I was curious, so I watched him walk back to the parking lot and get into his truck. My heart sank when he pulled away, and I noticed two heads pop up from the back seats, as if they were hiding out in view until the car was moving. To make matters even more sketchy, he did not pull into the nearest gas station, and instead pulled onto the highway. Obviously not something someone alone and running out of gas would do. Fast forward 2 days later, and I stop at the same Walmart, and what do I find? Yup, it was him. Still there and still giving the same story about being stranded and needing someone to come with him. This time, instead of telling the store, I just immediately called the police. I don't know if he recognized me and saw me on the phone, but he left very soon after, and I never saw him in the parking lot again. Story number 2. This happened over 20 years ago, when I was 8 or 9 years old. My mom took me along to the mall with her for the day. I got very bored and she was going to shop in Christopher and Banks, which was across the way from KB Toy. I was old enough to go into the toy store on my own, while my mom shopped close by. I was in the doll section looking at the baby dolls when I kneeled down. There was a man close by also looking at the baby dolls. The next thing I know, he was right behind me, and he literally rubs his body against my head. I was a little weirded out, but I just thought it was an accident, so I did not get up. He continues to look intensely at the dolls and comes back and thrusts his pelvis into my head. At that point, I knew he was an absolute weirdo, and I had to get out of there. I got up and sprinted across the hall to find my mom. The craziest thing is I was too embarrassed to tell her. We kept shopping that day and I was terrified to see him again. As we were getting pretzels, there he was going up the escalator. He saw me and smiled. I felt sick to my stomach and knew that man was an absolute monster. Story number 3. This happened when I was 12. My family lived in an apartment, and I usually got home from school around 2 p.m. My parents got home around 5, so I was alone for a while. Usually I would just go to my room and take a nap or watch videos on my iPod. We lived on the second floor in a very small complex. One day I came home and I was laying in my bed when I heard a knocking sound. It was very hard and slow, so immediately I was scared and I called my parents. I hid in the closet for a while because the knocking went on for 30 minutes. When my parents got home, they noticed there were footprints on the door, so someone had actually been kicking it. This happened a few times over the span of weeks, that when I get home, I'd have to put a chair on the door so if someone tried to get in, it wouldn't open. It was very scary. I was 12 and not sure what to do. My parents always told me never to open the door to strangers, so I never did. One day, my family and I go out to the store to do some shopping. I remember it was around Easter. We'd bought the little painting kits for eggs, so I was very excited. We come home, and as we approach the door, we notice the door looks open. We try to open it, but it's still locked, and it had just been kicked in so hard. Our front door neighbors come out and say she called the police because our downstairs neighbor was kicking our door violently. The police get there and question us, and we let them know we haven't been home all day. They question the man downstairs, and he tells them that we were being excessively loud and he was hearing things. Obviously, we hadn't been home, so there's no one making noise. We see the police take him away, apparently to get a mental evaluation. The man was very calm and smiling while the police took him away. A week later, he returns home. This is when we decided that we should move. We weren't sure what his goal had been all the times that he tried to kick in our door. I was so scared about what he could have done to me if he had gained entrance into our home. He had been excessively violent and he'd kicked the door in for an hour and a half. I never called the cops and I was only 12, so I didn't really know how to handle the situation. The police told me that if it happened again to call them immediately. We moved soon after and that was the end of it. I still get so much anxiety when someone knocks on the door. I grew up in those apartments and always felt safe. It was a true shame that we had to move away like that. I didn't really understand the scale of the situation. The man was obviously trying to get in or violently kick down the door. The police think he was hearing things, and I don't blame him if he needed help with his mental health, but there was no reason to be as violent as he was. Story number 4. This happened to me around 10 years ago, when I was 18 or 19. At the time I was in a new relationship, still in the early stages when everything was brand new and an adventure. My girlfriend came from a well-off family and had very strict parents who weren't fond of her being out so much, nor our social groups, so it was often difficult to meet. To this end, we would regularly sneak out of our houses and meet up around 1 a.m., stay out together most of the night. The road she lived on was an upper middle class area, connected to a Lark Park Forest River walk that by day was a very popular destination for joggers, as well as kayakers. By night, this was a hot spot for drug deals, dodgy folk, and doggers. Not the safest place to go at night, but a regular haunt nonetheless. Anyway, this night I head over to her house and wait outside. I should mention that I look very out of place with scruffy hair and a long coat. She is delayed getting out for some reasons that now escape me, so I decided to chill out for a while outside and wait. Location-wise, I'm at the side of a road with 2 large fields on either side, both of which have a large tree and hedge line between them and the road. After 20 to 30 minutes, I hear a car driving up the road towards me, and I get this horrible gut-wrenching feeling telling me to get off the road. I felt like Frodo sensing the impending arrival of Nazgul. I quickly climb over the hedge and drop down prone on the other side and stay as still as possible. The car slows down as it approaches where I've been standing and waiting. I'm fairly certain the driver must have seen me. The car stays there and no one leaves. The engine idles and just stays at the spot on the road waiting. I assume to spot me again. I'm terrified. I have no idea who they would be, but I can't shake the horrible feeling in my gut at all. I hide for what felt like hours, but in reality would have been no more than 30 minutes. The car eventually drives on, heading towards a car park for the forest and the dead end. I still can't shake the fear and don't want to risk getting caught, but also didn't feel safe. So I move to the opposite side of the road and hide behind the other hedge. Soon enough, I heard the familiar sound of an engine as the car comes back down again and stops nearby where I'm waiting. They hang around for another 20 minutes or so before driving away again, this time for good. I can't remember how long it took me to get the courage to leave. In hindsight, the rational part of my brain likes to just think that someone had just phoned the police on the scruffy guy loitering around midnight, but I'm really not sure. Their behavior felt very off, and that feeling in my gut was like nothing I've felt since. At the time, I couldn't shake the fear of this unknown person just sitting in a car waiting for me to try and move, much like a hunter waiting patiently for prey. I was walking my dog tonight because he was in my room a lot of the day while I caught up on homework. Halfway through my walk, I decided to go another way because I was holding a bag of dog shit and knew where trash would be. Let me note, I live in a slightly okay part of a pretty bad neighborhood, but I'm fairly strong, and not to mention my crazy German Shepherd, Caesar. Let me say, Caesar hates strangers right now, but usually doesn't bark or anything while walking next to people. Anyway, as we continued down the sidewalk and down the bend, I notice a man and immediately my dog stares at him. So do I. There was just something wrong. He was walking the same direction, but as I turned down the street, he turned around in such a creepy manner. It was kind of like the old lady in the It Chapter 2 film, where the old lady is first seen as it and turns around. He started walking towards me but was still far away. But then he was taking very strange, accentuated steps, unusually long ones at that. When I got close enough, I saw his creepy dead eyes and smile. His skin was dark and smooth, and he stared at me so creepily. I still said, "What's up, man?" and got no reply. Maybe he hadn't heard me. The closer I got, I wondered why he was walking so strange beforehand. Didn't even seem possible to do so consistently. He looked sober and blank but was walking normal but fast now. We were getting closer, and he started with those steps again. My dog snarled and lunged at him, biting at the air. The man didn't fucking flinch. Kept walking with those steps. Now I rarely get scared of strangers, with or without my dog. I've dealt with very mentally unsound people, drug traffickers, very scary people. I'm good at fighting, and seldom do I get scared of strangers. But I got the damn chills and was so creeped out. I don't want to say it was a demon or whatever, but I just don't know. I saw a bat a few minutes later, and yesterday, I woke up seeing a tall shadow at the foot of my bed. I don't think these things are related, or I hope not, but I'm completely freaked out. I'm a strong skeptic and haven't experienced anything paranormal in a long time. Any guesses or help? The way he turned around and the way he walked and looked at me. Also, my dog was going for his throat. Story number 2. When I was around 6 years old, my brother and I went to this creepy daycare center in a huge old Victorian home. This was during the late 1980s, when stories of child abduction and satanic cults were pretty rampant in the culture, as well as the news. We went to kindergarten half-days. Our mother would drop us off and we'd get to the bus to and from school. Our mother would pick us up after she got off work at the local hospital. There was a large playground out back that was fenced off. After getting out of school, the kids from the center would play out back. At some point, this strange guy, maybe around 20, started coming around and talking to the kids through the fence. He acted weird and spoke in a funny voice. We weren't sure if he was developmentally delayed or pretending to be. He would flash his privates at some of the kids and ask them to flash back. Luckily, I only saw this once and noped the hell out of there. He creeped most of us out, and I know we tried to stay away from him. For whatever reason, the ladies that worked at the daycare center never seemed to be around when this man would show up, or believe us when we explained it to them. One day after getting off the school bus, myself and another kid took a shortcut from the bus stop to the daycare, basically just cutting between some small bushes on the side of the building. My brother was in the front, I was in the middle, and the third kid was behind us. Then we heard it. A rustling in the bushes and a loud shouting. "I'm gonna get you." Whipping around, I saw the creepy guy standing behind us. He started laughing hysterically and grabbed the kid behind us, who immediately started screaming and kicking at him. My brother and I turned around and grabbed our friend by the arms and started pulling him away, sort of playing tug-of-war with this kid. All the while, the guy is slobbering and talking about things he wants to do to us. We must have made a racket because eventually the guy let go and took off. We ran inside crying and tried to explain to the daycare ladies, who were just angry at us, said we were lying or that the guy was only joking. I remember our mother being very mad and yelling at us for taking shortcuts. I don't really remember anything after that, and I don't think anyone called the police or we ever saw him again. Story number 3. When I was in college, I'd always park in this one parking deck. Every morning I'd get there just in time to get one of the last spots on the top deck. It's on the edge of campus, but still a very busy area during the day. Even at late hours of the night, there'd still be a few cars around. There was one day I decided to stay on campus late to study, and I left the library sometime around 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. It's about a 15-minute walk through the most heavily trafficked part of campus to get back to my car. So of course, this was the first night I walked the entire route without seeing a single person, not even by the dorms. I got to the deck and noticed that there were no cars, not even one on the first floor. I pressed the elevator button and waited. A few seconds later, a car came into the deck, and I could see this man behind the wheel. He looked at me, swerved around to park on the first floor, but kept the lights and engine on. I thought nothing of it because music majors frequent this parking deck and often come to campus to practice at odd hours. Right as I got into the elevator, though, I saw through the closing doors that he was starting to drive up through the deck. I got up to the top deck and no other car was up there, except for mine on the opposite side from the elevators. I had to walk slowly to my car because it had snowed recently, and there were still patches of ice on the deck. Right as I got to my car and opened the passenger door to throw my bag in, I see lights coming up from the floor below, and the same car was coming up onto the top deck. The guy's face just looks emotionless. I couldn't get around in my car to the driver's seat without getting close enough to his car, but right as he passed me, he slowed down and watched me. Suddenly he hits the gas and whips around the loop of the deck and speeds towards me. I ran around and got into the driver's seat. and watched him in my mirrors. He slowed down again, coming behind me, and then sped off back down the deck. I never saw him again. Story number 4. This happened to me when I was a child, and I still remember it very clearly to this day, as it set me up for a lifelong fear of being watched as I sleep. I was 6 years old, and me and my family were living in public housing, as we had recently come to America. Our apartment was on the first floor, but slightly underground, as my bedroom window was level with the ground outside. The windows were big and had a ledge. On my ledge I had stuffed animals lined up looking out the window. On this specific night, I was having trouble sleeping, as there were strange noises coming from my outside window, along with tapping. I looked out my window and saw a strange man, crouching and peeping through the gap between my curtains and the wall, looking directly at me, with a strange look on his face. I started screaming and crying. My dad ran into my room to assure me that everything was all right, and I was just having a bad dream. But I hadn't been sleeping. I couldn't sleep that night because I was having a weird feeling the entire night of being watched. My dad opened the curtains and no one was there. To comfort me, he slept in bed with me, but I still couldn't sleep. He, on the other hand, had knocked out. It was getting later in the night, and the weird noises started up again. It sounded like someone trying to cut through the screen and tapping on the window with the blade as he cut through with the motion. I woke my dad up quietly, trying to show him what I had told him about. He ripped open the curtains and saw the man with a knife cutting through the screen. He jumped out of bed and ran for the door, and then ran to chase the man who was watching me sleep, trying to break into our home. He chased the man to his car, but he sped off before my father had a chance. My parents called the police and told them what happened, but nothing ever really came of it. From that night on, I've had an irrational fear and never sleep by a window. I used to have night terrors about the incident for years. I haven't thought about this for a while, but I had another dream about it recently, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I asked my dad about it recently, and he refused to talk about it with me. So strange man trying to break into my room. Let's not meet, and I hope I never met you before. Story number 5. In the evenings, my friend and I, who are both adults, like to take a walk in the park in the evenings for a bit of a workout. Usually it's a fairly safe environment. We see the regulars walking and there's people bringing their kids to play. But after 8 p.m. it starts to become empty. Today it was around 8:45 or 9 p.m. We notice the parking lot is completely empty, save for a white van driving around. But we have to cross the lot to get where we're going. We note it as being a bit strange but keep walking. As soon as it sees us, it literally turns around towards us and starts to follow us. Initially the van was about 15 feet away, but it keeps speeding up until it's 5 to 10 feet behind us. I try to tell my friend we should try to get on the grass to where it can't drive on, but she insists we just keep walking as fast as we can and get out of there. I don't want to leave her either, so I just listen and try walking as fast as I can with her. As we keep walking, the van gradually gets faster. At this point, we're sure it's following us and not just trying to exit the parking lot. It stopped at the exit and flat out pulled into the parking spot next to us so it could turn to properly keep following us. At this point, it's 2 feet away from us, and we're trying to get away from it. Just as the van is right up to us, the van stops. I'm a bit confused, but I keep walking, till 5 seconds later, the park ranger pulls into the lot to patrol the park. When I look back, I can see the van speeding off in the opposite direction, going around to the other end of the park to exit. We decided it was time to go home after that. Story number 6. This happened when I was 4 years old. My memory of the events are quite vivid, as this was the closest thing I've ever been to possibly dying. I was at the grocery store with my mom. While she was buying groceries, she left me outside to play on those pretend cars that you put a quarter in so it moves back and forward. We lived in a small town, so there was a feeling of trust in the community, and my mom felt safe leaving me out there by myself. 4-year-old me was having the time of her life on that car. I didn't even take notice of the man standing nearby. A skinny and rather short man. He was sporting a trench coat that nearly touched his feet. He looked like he was in his mid-30s and was already starting to bald. Once the car ride stopped, the man walked up to me. I remember him kneeling down to me, letting out a wide grin and asking, "Hey, would you like another quarter, little lady?" "Sure, mister," I said. He smiled and placed a quarter in my hand. He held on to my hand for quite a while. I put the quarter back in the machine and went for another ride. He was watching me the entire time. Mom was taking a little longer than expected. The car ride was over again, so the man picked me up from the ride and stood me in front of him. He said, "I have a car myself. Do you want to come for a ride with me?" I remember being a little confused by the question. It's like I was starting to notice something was a little off. "Don't worry," he assured me. "This ride is free of charge." He grinned again. He held out his hand and I stupidly accepted it. We started walking towards his car. It was this small dented thing that hadn't been cleaned in years. When he opened his car door, it was accompanied by a high-pitched yell from behind me. My mom, along with a large security guard, were sprinting towards me. The man panicked, jumped in his car and drove off immediately. I was left in the parking space by myself. My mom grabbed me and hugged me. I could feel her tears running down my shoulder. I heard the security guard on his walkie-talkie requesting assistance. Unfortunately, they never found the man. Thinking back to that day 20 years ago really puts this thing into perspective. I was possibly 10 seconds away from being taken forever, never to see my mom again. The fact that this man might still be roaming the streets absolutely terrifies me. I hope no one else has gotten hurt because of him. This happened to me 3 years ago. I was in college, but I took night class because I was working full-time by day. That night my class ended around 10 p.m. The school is a bit far away from my home. I could walk, but it was winter and lots of snow had fallen that week. The walkways were full of snow. It would have taken me forever to walk home. My bus app told me that I had just missed the bus, and the next one was 30 minutes away. When this happens, I would always walk to the nearest subway, because there was another bus stop, and instead of waiting and freezing, I would walk to warm myself up a little. So that is exactly what I did that night. The shortest way to the subway station was through a park. I always took that path and had no reason to worry that this night was going to be any different. Before arriving to the park entrance, I noticed there was a guy with a very recognizable hockey-themed winter hat smoking near the benches. As soon as he saw me, he picked up his things, slowly walked toward the walkway. I have no idea why, but I found him suspicious and I remembered something my mom told me when I was a child. When you feel like something is off about someone at night, find any reason you can to slow down and let him walk past you. You'd rather have someone in front of you than behind you. For some reason, I thought he was weird and did just like my mom told me. I faked receiving a text and slowed down so he could walk in front of me. He was so incredibly slow, as if he wanted me to get past him, but I would just slow down even more. He was vaping something that smelled like super fake strawberry. This will be important later. I was hoping he wouldn't go into the park, but he did. We walked like that in the park until I noticed there was a hockey game going on. I decided I would go and watch the match, just to let him take some distance before I would keep going. As I was turning right to get to the outdoor ice rink, he turned left on a path that goes by a building. I was reassured that he wasn't going in the same direction I needed to go. Still, I was a bit curious about the match, so I watched it for a minute or so, then turned back to go on the path. As I turned, my blood ran cold. The same guy that turned left was turning the other corner of the building. He just walked around the building. If I had kept going instead of watching the hockey by doing this, he would have been behind me. I was petrified, but I was still relatively safe because there were people around. The guy walked slowly as ever in the direction I needed to go, but I did not follow him right away. I waited for a bunch of students to walk by, and then I walked behind them. Safety in numbers. He was waiting by the park exit, checking his phone. When he saw the bunch of students and he walked away, normal speed this time. I saw him turn right on a street, and I thought it was the end of it. Eventually, I reached a subway station and started waiting for the bus. And then, I smelled a very familiar, potent strawberry smell. As I turned to look around, there was the guy with the hockey-themed hat, and another guy, both staring at me. When the bus arrived, I was shaking. It was not because of the cold. They both got on the bus with me and other passengers. I told the bus driver about what was happening. Where I live, past 9 p.m., women can ask a bus driver to be dropped alone at a bus stop, making sure no one can follow her. That is exactly what the bus driver did. I had the bright idea to get out one stop early, and I walked in the opposite direction from my home and waited for the bus to leave. I turned around to wave at the bus driver as a way of thanking him, and I saw the two guys banging on the middle door. The bus driver locked them in so they wouldn't open. I took that bus almost every night, and I never saw those two guys, nor have I ever seen them around my house. But here they were banging on the door, and although I could not hear them, I could clearly see them yell at the bus driver. When the lights finally turned green and the bus left, I rushed back home faster than I ever did in the snow. The next night after school, I was too nervous to use my shortcut through the park, so I took the long way around. I got to my bus safely, but what I saw on that ride scared the living hell out of me. At the bus stop that I was dropped off at the previous day were two guys, one with a hockey-themed hat. They did not get on the bus. My first thought was they were waiting for me and not the bus. Luckily for me, this was not my stop. Maybe I was just paranoid, and all of this was just a strange series of coincidences. But I was scared to get on that bus. Still am today. I moved in with my boyfriend since then, but the shortest way to our house is through the park. I still take the long way around at night. Story number 2. This occurred in 2009. I was 22 years old and was leaving my home state of California to head east for my corrections job. I was driving down the loneliest highway portion of the route, and it was around 3 a.m. on a Sunday. They don't call it the loneliest highway for nothing. I hadn't seen another soul for at least a half hour. I was starting to get sleepy, but I wasn't tired enough to pull over and take a nap when I saw a broken down car on the side of the highway. I slowed and saw a woman standing next to the car. I approached this woman with caution, rolling down my window just a sliver. Something about her wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it then, but I know now it was my subconscious screaming a red flag. I asked her if she needed me to call a tow truck or AAA for her. She immediately tried to open my door. I explained to her that I didn't feel comfortable letting her in, but that I would wait until a tow truck came. She immediately got this look of rage on her face, started to berate me. "You're a big man, what am I going to do to you?" and saying I was cruel for not letting her in. This is where I fucked up. I can see this now 10 years later. I begrudgingly unlocked my door, figuring she was right. She's at most 5'2" and I'm over 6 feet, and have 100 pounds on her. She slips in and I ask her who I can call. This was 10 years ago, so I had a little BlackBerry Slide. She starts telling me that she'd just prefer if I'd give her a ride to the next town. Now, I'm starting to realize I've fucked up because she's avoiding eye contact, and she's fumbling in her purse. When I mentioned calling for help, she gets aggressive, demanding I take her to the next town. I'm so busy trying to unfuck this situation, I miss a man who was either hiding in or near her car. It wasn't until he was almost to my driver's side door that I managed to catch him in my rear view mirror. Fight or flight kicked in. I put my car in drive and sped off right as the fucker was reaching for my car door. I sped off and heard a ping noise, and then my rear view mirror exploded. He was shooting at me. The adrenaline alone had me going near 90. By this time, homegirl realized in whatever drug-induced stupor she was in, her little plan was futile. She started hitting me, telling me to stop and let her out. When I reached enough distance, I did just that, pulled over and demanded she get out of my vehicle. She started going for the oversized purse she had, but I had enough and I was literally shaking with adrenaline. I reached over, opened the door, and pretty much shoved her out. I tried grabbing for her purse, but she managed to hold on to it not before dumping half of what was in there on my passenger seat. I sped off, my door still open. I waited until I was a safe distance away and slammed it and locked it. I clenched the wheel and drove, feeling like I was on autopilot. It wasn't till later that morning that I pulled into a Denny's did I realize how close I was to pretty much dying. I had a good cry and then realized a bunch of her things spilled onto my passenger seat. Most of it was just nasty wadded up napkins, a few tubes of lipstick, and drug paraphernalia. I had considered calling the cops or finding a highway patrol officer. I did do something stupid. I tossed all of her things that had fallen into a trash bag and threw them away. At the time, I had the dream of becoming a cop and knew if I got caught with drug paraphernalia, that would be impossible. I didn't think that they would believe that the drug paraphernalia wasn't mine. I noticed a cop at the gas station across from the Denny's, told him what happened. He pretty much berated me for pulling over and letting her in. He did say he'd look into it, but I doubt he did. I was so shaken I pretty much picked up my pancakes and then left to continue on my way. Story number 3. I live in a fairly safe area. The distance between my school and home wasn't too far, so my mom never minded us walking home alone. I left school a little bit late one day, probably around 4 p.m. Not that much later, but it was fall, so it was starting to get dark. I noticed a strange man walking behind me and thought nothing of it, so I carried on walking until I felt uncomfortable because he had gotten closer. I decided to take a shortcut, thinking that there would be no way he would know where I was going. He followed me up the path and through the shortcut. Now freaking out, I decided to start jogging, trying not to make it obvious, but he started speeding up and almost jogging too. I was small, so my jogging was probably his speed of walking. I got close to home and ran up my path to turn into my garden. Then I turned around to see that he had followed me up the path until he saw me reach my garden. He literally just turned around and walked back the other way. I don't know what his intentions were, nor do I want to know, but I ran in the house and straight upstairs to my bedroom. Just started crying. 10 to 15 minutes later, my mom came up and asked me what was wrong. I told her and she asked why I hadn't come straight to her when I came home. That was the last time I wanted to walk home from school. Story number 4. So a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years, retired and moved to a very small town in central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers, or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or cigarettes. This all took place in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the date well, because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit. My dad would let me drive him to and from work. just to get experience on the road. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table, along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run the register, stock the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right next to I-75. This in itself was really strange, because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere, was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting just a strange and creepy vibe about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride up to the next big town, up north from us. Ocala was the town. This is very important. My dad lets her know that he was working, and there's no way that he can take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she is looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and suddenly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns back to my dad and points at me, asking if I can take her. My dad responded back that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad, since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Turns out he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he'd seen her walking up the drive. She cusses him for a minute and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she slammed it, and then she walks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back up to the interstate and then starts up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passes and I'm in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I hear my dad yelling from the living room, "Son, get your ass in here and look at this." I quickly run into the living room and see my dad pointing at the television, and I look at a mugshot of the lady up on the screen, and immediately remember the lady who had been in the store. Turns out I almost gave a car ride to Eileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer and then later put to death. I still have nightmares about what could have happened to me. Me and some friends went to an abandoned mental asylum at night, not really expecting much. We busted in one of the boarded up windows, and when we were inside we all heard talking. We figured other people were there, so we followed the sound. We were walking down the hall and heard what sounded like a woman whispering, "Why did you take my baby?" over and over again. At this point I'm visibly shaking, and we all believed we found where the sound was coming from. We go in this room and there was a huge cage. It looked like one of those pet carriers, but human-sized. I don't know what the fuck happened that night. I don't really believe dead people were talking in there, but the sheer creepiness of it all is just too much. My cousin and his family, wife and infant son, had lived in their house for about 5 years. His wife left home to drop the baby off at daycare before work, but realized she had left her phone at home. Entering the house, she turned the corner to the hallway and nearly ran into the drop-down attic door, which was fully extended. They never used the attic, as it was filled with loose insulation, and my cousin had left for work hours earlier. She quietly left the house, drove down the corner and called the police. When the police investigated, they found a short-range transmitter connected to several cameras hidden throughout their home. The light fixture in the shower, the ceiling fan above their bed, even a pinhole in the nursery were sending videos to a nearby location. Their neighbor a few houses away had been given a key by the prior owners and installed surveillance equipment once he knew their schedule. My cousin's wife walked in on him updating his equipment, but he forgot something at his house and left to get it when she walked in. He had been watching them for years. I worked at a women's clothing mail order catalog call center. During training, a veteran worker was talking about getting to know the frequent callers and the story of one of them. There was an elderly lady that used to call in often. She was blind but would have the manager of the complex help her pick out things from the catalog. She would order often, and they got to know her by name. Eventually, the lady stopped calling. They contacted the number they had on file, which was the apartment manager's number. The old lady was fine but had to be moved to a new building because, well, the old lady was very meticulous with her cleaning. She cleaned everything often at old lady level. The manager had come in to do some maintenance for the first time in many months. Every room in her apartment above head level had thick webs and nests of black widow spiders, hundreds and hundreds of them. Can you imagine an oblivious old lady walking around blind in a house she thinks spotlessly clean? But there was a soul-freezing nightmare swarming all over the ceiling. This happened to a friend of mine. She used to live in an entirely different town when she was younger, and her closet had this strange door in the back of it. Whether it was imagined just due to her being a child at the time, or if it really did happen, she started to hear noises coming from behind this door whenever she went to bed. She told me that several times she tried telling her parents that she was hearing these noises, but they never believed her. Some time goes by and one day her parents get a call from the police because they just arrested a homeless man. This was not just any homeless man though. This homeless man was living in some sort of tunnel that goes straight to that door in the back of her closet. So every once in a while, for whatever reason, this man would come through that door and watch my friend sleep in her closet. This is a true story about my grandmother that takes place before they had children. My grandpa Darrell worked night shifts, so my grandma Dora was home alone most nights. Her sister-in-law Rose would randomly come over to keep her company. Dora decided to go to bed early one night. Rose came over that night to see how she was doing. She went to Dora's bedroom after calling for her with a reply of, "I'm in bed, just come in." Upon entering the room, Rose starts acting weird and telling her she really wants her to get up and come help her with something in the kitchen. Dora was ready to go to sleep and was already in bed and really didn't want to. Rose was really adamant for her to come help her, telling her it was urgent. After a while, Dora eventually got up and followed Rose to the kitchen. Upon entering, Rose whispers in a panic with tears in her eyes, "There's a man under your bed with a knife." Dora, of course, didn't believe at first, but seeing the panic in Rose's eyes, she couldn't not believe her. They proceeded to call the police and left to the neighbor's house. Cops came and found a man hiding in the closet with a butcher knife. My friend was visiting family in the States. They lived in a rural community of Maine, and one morning she woke up before everyone else and decided to go for a run. After 30 minutes, she turned back and started noticing a van following a few blocks behind her. She thought it was strange, so she started turning down a few streets, with the van following every move. She started sprinting and the van sped up too. She ran to the first house she could find and started banging on the door. No answer. She hopped the fence and started banging on the next door. Dog in the house started barking at her, but no one answered. She jumped into the empty pool in the backyard and hid while dialing 911. A car parked in the front of the house, and a man started calling out to her, offering to give her a ride home. The dog in the house was now barking like crazy, and the man left after about a minute. Police showed up and took her back to her family's place. She gave a report and they identified the van from a nearby HVAC business. It had been stolen earlier that day. About 30 years ago, my mom went on a blind date. Her date took her to a restaurant, and although he was nice enough, she just wasn't into him. Not even halfway through the meal, she was already thinking of ways to leave early. The waiter could tell. While my mom's date was in the restroom, the waiter approached her and asked her if she was okay. She explained she was on a blind date and not having much fun. Turns out the waiter was just about to get off work. He offered to give her a ride home if she waited another 10 minutes. She considered it and was about to say yes when her date came back from the restroom. She gave a subtle headshake no to the waiter and smiled. She and her date finished their meals and he took her home. The next night my mom was watching the evening news. A story comes on about a woman being raped and murdered behind a restaurant the night before. The restaurant was the one she had been at. They showed the murderer's picture, and it was the waiter. I used to live next to a senile old woman who would knock on my door late at night crying and saying there was somebody on her roof. I'd always have to assure her that it was just possums running around and that everything was fine. This went on for years until her kids finally sent her to a home and new people moved in. A week or so after this, I woke up to police cars on the street outside my house. I asked the new neighbor what happened, and he told me he got out of bed and saw legs dangling out of the ceiling in the kitchen, and he assumed he was being robbed. The guy got away, but when the cops checked inside the roof, they found chairs, cans of beans, water bottles, magazines, and some blankets. The old man had been set up there for at least 2 years, assuming her complaints coincided with him moving in. She once told me her dementia was so bad she'd sometimes have to go grocery shopping a few times a day because she'd come home and realize she forgot to buy anything. I wondered now if it was just because he was taking all of her food. My high school teacher attended Central Washington University in the early 1970s. She and her best friend Susan Rancourt were leaving the library late at night to go to a movie. Susan was offering to carpool together on the way out when they were approached by a guy with a broken arm, trying to carry a diorama of some sort. He asked for some assistance, which they both gladly agreed to, but my teacher had left one of her books in the library. The last she saw Susan was her smiling face as she graciously helped this guy to his beetle. Susan was reported missing, and it turned out that she was abducted and murdered by Ted Bundy. My ex-wife and I woke up in the middle of the night to find all of our lights out in the house. We had not lost power. The living room light that we always leave on overnight had been turned off. The bathroom nightlight was removed and placed under the sink. The computer had been unplugged, and the monitor cord was unplugged and neatly folded on the desk. All of the doors and windows in the house were unlocked, undamaged, and standing wide open. Our bedroom door was open, and the TV we always fall asleep to was turned off. Nothing was taken. Our cats were both hiding behind the refrigerator and stayed there for most of the next day. Whenever someone came and knocked at the door, our larger cat would start to growl and stare at the front from then on. She no longer does this after we moved. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my little sister was a light sleeper and I would stay up till dawn. Of course, I always ended up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tired. One night I wake up to a prickly feeling. Like an instinct, I just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of the trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in this fucking tree. The family dog bashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' bedroom, Try to explain to my parents that there's a strange person outside. My dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with our dog to find out what's going on. I tremble in Mom's arms until Dad comes home, says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill in my sister what has just happened. Dad is making regular rounds on the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still and finally I think I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turns around to run a straight line. When I was a teenager, I was home alone one weekend, and I was sleeping in my parents' room since there was a TV in there. Sometime around 2 a.m., I felt like I was being watched from the direction of the hallway. I look up and I saw a shadow person staring at me. It was weird because it was a pure man-shaped black mass, and I could see him in the dark hallway. I'm guessing the light from the television helped. I sat up and stared back, but I was terrified. We looked at each other for probably 5 seconds, and then it turned and walked down the hall. A few seconds later, I heard a loud crash. I was so scared I turned the TV to the Disney Channel and stayed awake for as long as possible. When I woke up the next morning, I walked down the hall to the bathroom, and that's when I noticed a mirror that was hanging, fallen off the wall. My family still doesn't believe me, but I know what happened. Laying in bed one night, it's pitch black apparent from the light creeping under the door from the landing. My mom was actually with me in the same room, as we had only just moved in and she was sleeping on the floor. I look up and the door slowly creaks open, and slowly an older woman peers around the door, looks at me and walks away. I just thought I was having a nightmare, turned around very fast and went under the covers, hoping I would wake up. Then I will never forget my mom whispering to me, "Did you just see someone peer around the door?" Safe to say we didn't sleep a wink that night. I was a rookie cop when my brother committed suicide. He was one of my older siblings, but we were very close. He died in another state, and I had a lot of guilt about not recognizing the signs. His remains were in bad shape by the time he was discovered, so it was a closed casket service. About a week after he died, I was back at work one night, and my partner and I see a pimp pistol whipping one of his girls. I jump out and the pimp sees me and the foot chase was on. I was running after him, gun in hand, and he cuts through a narrow corridor under a building that leads to a courtyard in the middle. Right before I reach the courtyard, I hear, "It's okay," in my dead brother's voice. I hit the courtyard and the guy is against the side pointing a gun at my head. He squeezes the trigger twice. I froze for a millisecond and then started beating him in the head with my revolver. To this day, I don't know why I didn't just shoot him, cuff him, and walk him back to the street and find my partner. I tell my partner about him squeezing the trigger, but not the voice I heard. We unload the gun, which is a .32 revolver right there, and 2 bullets have strike marks on them. Take the gun to the lab for testing. Tell the tech the story. He puts the 2 bullets with a strike mark back in and shoots into the test tank. Both bullets fired. I hope you guys enjoy these horrifying stories. It was a pleasure to narrate these. Be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. Email your true scary stories to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I'll include my email link in the description box below as well. Till we meet again, stay sinful.